Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. My name is Elvis, and as always, I am your host. All right, so just want to say thank you all for the kind comments about making it to 1 month and for the continued support. Let's get back right at it. First off, we're going to have a lot of spoilers in this episode. I'm going to be spoiling a lot of things because there's been so much coming out and some things that have actually ended. One of the things that I'm going to spoil are going to be the season finales of Gotham and Krypton. I'm going to get really into those and into the seasons and to my thoughts on the shows as a whole, as well as a giant kind of discussion and really depthy dissection of that movie and my thoughts on that movie and what it did and all the different characters and character arcs. So be forewarned, if you haven't caught any of those, I recommend all of them, honestly. So go check them out. Come back if you want to hear these thoughts. Or if you're like me and spoilers don't really hamper your enjoyment, then please let me know what you think and compare and contrast. As always, let's start off with some news. Probably the biggest news right now is the Watchmen TV show has finally gotten more solid details about what direction it's taking, the characters that are going to be in it, and the general sort of world building that Damon Lindelof is going to be doing in crafting this new version for television, I think for HBO, right? And it was probably done in the most needlessly convoluted way, where it's something that we probably could have understood, yet they decided to kind of like seed it out a bit more and present it as news in probably the most unnecessarily weird and complicated way. Like I said, what happened was that it's very much like the Fargo TV show or even Gotham and Krypton, where they're taking the comic as the jumping off point of the world and then they're crafting a new story set within that kind of template. It's like Fargo. If no one's here has seen the Fargo TV show, it's based on the Coen Brothers movie, but it uses the Coen Brothers movie as a setting to really reiterate the common themes of that movie and Coen Brothers' other movies, to do more crime dramedy stuff within that. I don't think it's done it very well, but that's sort of the main concept that Watchmen TV show is starting to do right now. The Watchmen comic and the plot will have happened. We're going to be following characters in the present day set within that universe. And that could be interesting, but in a general sort of sense. Just having these characters who I believe are going to be police officers and other sort of civilians, it's interesting just in the sense of being these sort of professions and roles in a superhero universe, especially one that's been so government oriented, so militarized, and just very allegorical. Just to see how that balances out with these characters as a whole. I don't think you really needed the Watchmen backdrop for it as much as you needed it for Fargo, because the Fargo TV show was so much about the Coen brothers as filmmakers and as storytellers that it was so completely focused. And that's one of the things that I really didn't like about the Fargo TV show, that it was so slavishly devoted to really reiterating and repeating stuff that the Coen brothers had done in their movies. So really, the Watchmen TV show has more for it because it's not a hard concept to understand. People in superhero universe, how they move along in this side of this. I don't really think that there's much they could do wrong with that. There really is a lot of ways to make that interesting. I think the real pitfalls they have is how much they want to tie it to the comic. There's really no need to, honestly. Just have the Watchmen brand and have the characters go about their business in this kind of setting. There's no real need to have Night Owl show up as an old man, or to have them investigate the Watchmen story arc as the cops. Just have them go about their lives and feed off stories from there. That's one of the things that I didn't like about Fargo, is that the first season especially kept trying to harken back to the movie and its characters and the plot beats of that movie way too much, that the season really suffered for it. The show really didn't have an identity at all. And that's what I'm worried about the Watchmen TV show, because it's a good idea, good concept. It could have a lot of fodder for stories, as long as they don't try to retread weathered ground at this point. If you have to bring up old stuff the comic already did, then you're not taking advantage of what you're actually trying to set up. And really what I meant about How this was told to people in a convoluted way was that David Lindelof actually put out like this huge letter to the fans, written as if he were Dr. Manhattan, going back and forth between his timeline about how much Watchmen meant to him. And it felt like an explanation or a rationalization to the fans about why he's doing it this way, when it's just like, you didn't need to do all that. Just say it's in the universe of Watchmen and following these characters. No one would have batted an eye. The most people batted an eye at was the idea that it would be either another retelling, of which we got in like 3 different versions of in mediums other than the comic, or really just new characters fulfilling the same roles in the same story arc. Those are the only things people were concerned about, not that you were just going to use it as a setting. I'm interested in seeing where this is going to go. I'm not excited per se, but if it's going to do all these new things that it possibly could, then I'm all for it. Anyway, moving on to other news. There has been new developments with Boomerang's streaming service, in that they are finally going to be announcing original TV shows strictly for their service in the form of a new Flintstones and Scooby-Doo television series. Now, the Scooby-Doo one has been in the works for a while. Be Cool Scooby-Doo was actually formally canceled 2 or 3 years ago. It's still airing new episodes on Boomerang in the US, even though they all got run off on Eastern television a year and a half ago. So it's not something that is a surprise. The Flintstones one, though, is brand new. This is like the first time anyone's hearing of it. And they're both retreads of things that we have seen before at exactly these points in the development, which is kind of odd to me. There was the Flintstones television show, and after that, they made a TV show focused solely on Pibbles and Bam Bam. This time grown up as teenagers, and the same thing here. There's going to be another Pebbles and Bam Bam focused television show. But the most striking thing is that Be Cool Scooby-Doo, which I will always go to bat for, I think it's one of the best Scooby-Doo television shows ever made, second only to the original, is that it was really trying to capture the magic, atmosphere, and character of the original Where Are You?, which honestly, the 25 episodes of, people always underrate. I think people have such a misunderstanding of the original Scooby-Doo show, mainly because they think it's kind of hokey and campy and the characters are corny. But the characters are actually just ludicrous, absolutely insane madmen who completely stick their heads and noses into everything, and not even most of the time solve the mystery. They solve the mystery either by happenstance, or they get caught or captured and someone else solved the mystery for them. You really get the sense that these are meddling kids, that these are just a bunch of high school students who don't know what the hell they're doing. And that's what I love about that original 25 episodes. But the thing is, right, after 25 episodes, it was canceled. And I think why? Because it's only 25, the premise still has a lot. You haven't really run it into the ground. But then it was later brought back as the new Scooby-Doo movies, which was the Guest Star of the Week series. You had the Addams Family, the Harlem Globetrotters, and all sorts of comedians and actresses and actors of that time period. And so Be Cool Scooby-Doo being canceled is really kind of eerie, in that the new Scooby-Doo show coming right after it, it's called Scooby-Doo Guess Who, which is the same thing. It's the guest star TV show. They've already confirmed Ricky Gervais, Eric Andre, and Steve Urkel being voiced by Jaleel White. I didn't really like the new Scooby-Doo movies simply because I didn't think the series would focus on the mysteries, on making memorable villains and monsters, and more on just these crossovers, which, don't get me wrong, I love Scooby-Doo crossovers, but I don't want it to be the focus of the show. I like the one-off direct-to-video movies they're doing right now, like where they cross over with Batman Brave and the Bold or Kiss. Those are really good ones. But as the focus of the show, it just feels like such a shame, because I don't think they've ever really taken advantage of the Scooby-Doo formula like people think they have. They've either been sly or winking retreads, or just the impression that people get that they're trying to reinforce. Something like What's New Scooby-Doo really plays into the expectations that people had of that show that weren't really present in Scooby-Doo Where Are You? And so I think that's a really lesser show for it. While Be Cool Scooby-Doo really does try to bring in a lot of that flavor that Where Are You really did have in actuality. And so I recommend both of those. I hope Scooby-Doo Guess Who is good, but I'm not really excited for it. In our last live action or television movie film related news, we have finally full looks at Shazam and Aquaman costumes. It was at, I think, the Licensing Expo. And honestly, I like both of them. I think that they both really work for the characters and in a cinematic look. The Shazam one, we've already seen the leaked photos of Zachary Levi in shooting, and it still looks pretty much the same. I never hated it. I think the texture looks good in the full front poster that they released at the Licensing Expo, and I think the sort of pose and atmosphere they went for that one picture really does sell me a lot of it. Curse Shazam was one of my favorite Jeff Johns stories of the New 52, which is low hanging fruit, but it's still really a fun comic to read. It's a really fun story. And what this does, I think it shows how really wry and funny that comic had been with Zachary Levi sipping on this 7-Eleven huge gulp and looking pretty much bored and out of it. And I think that's just a really funny little pose. And it really makes me excited for like a full trailer or teaser at least, because I want to see whether or not they really capture that tone, because Curse Shazam is very much a little bit more cynical, a little more sarcastic than the classical Captain Marvel. And so I wonder really that the director, he's shown a lot of appreciation for that golden age, for that more classic innocent Billy. And I really want to see how he ended up balancing it out, what ended up winning out if he chose one or the other, because that's not something that can easily mix together and create a good combination. I think that Jeff Johns had to make some sacrifices in crafting Curse Shazam that, while I think really ironed a lot of hardcore fans, I didn't mind, but I do understand why he did it, and I hope other people do. And so I can't wait until we start seeing more things from the movie itself that's already finished main shooting with actors and everything. So the Aquaman look with Jason Momoa, it really does, again, harken back to Jeff Johns' stuff on Aquaman, especially the crustaceous shell-looking armor. It reminds me a lot of the Atlantean soldier armor from his run. So it looks really good. It's not vibrant orange, but it has a very kind of brownish orange look to it, which is nice. I don't like the muted colors on something like Aquaman, especially because I know they try to do something with Justice League where it was kind of like orange and had some green affectations to it too, but it just looked so muddy and unappealing. It just felt like a half measure. This also feels like a half measure, but it's a well balanced and thought out half measure of having this being shell armor, and so shells aren't always devoid of color, but it looks more natural that way if it's a bit muted, and not like the sequined or put together suit that they did for Justice League, or just the nothing they had for the original announcement or his little cameo in Batman vs Superman. So again, both those costumes I really enjoy. I can't wait to see both of them. I know that they keep teasing the footage for Aquaman because it finished filming so long ago, and they're just doing some retouches right now. And apparently James Wan really wants to get everything done because it's such an effects-heavy movie before showing any kind of footage in a teaser or a small trailer. And lastly, we round out the news with some actually comic-centered news from Hell, which I believe is one of Alan Moore's finest works. I love that comic so much. It is a huge depth of intricacy and plotting and story. It's magnificent. Is getting a colorized version from the artist Eddie Campbell. Now that's interesting because it's a book that is so entwined with the look of it. It is one of those books that you cannot separate strictly the story from the art or focus mainly on the story as a whole. You could not get another artist using the same script and really get the same sort of result of atmosphere just by reading it. And so I was wondering why even do a colorized version. So really the only explanation that I can think of is that someone from the publisher came up to Campbell and asked if he wanted to do this, and Campbell really only jumped at the chance or accepted because he's handling the colorization process, is to rectify some mistakes that he apparently has been holding on to for ages since the comic was published. There are some things that he notes in an interview about the colorization that he really wants to go back and fix, and so he's using the colorization as sort of a backdoor to get this thing done. There are apparently some panels and some environmental effects that, given the time period and the strict timeline that the comic actually does adhere to, which is one of its strengths, it's so well thought out and researched. I'm excited just to see what changes Eddie Campbell will make in just correcting things, and I'll probably get it based solely on that sensibility. The colorization holds no sway for me. I don't think that it would add anything really. It's such a book that is so tied into its art style that this change right now doesn't really seem like a good idea. But I'll get it just to see the vision that Eddie Campbell had in its complete sense. There, obviously, he wants to fix. I'll get it just for that. I'll get it just to see it done to his satisfaction. Anyway, so like I said, we're heading into spoiler territory right now. I'll be first doing the shows, then Deadpool 2, and I'll be putting a time code in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. So look below or in the description for iTunes and Castbox. Anyway, so let's start off with Gotham. Gotham is probably one of the best DC shows I've seen in a long time, especially in live action, which no matter what people say about how DC is putting the live action side of their stuff on lock, or that they've been really killing it because of the various shows they have in production right now, a lot of them are pretty crap, and Gotham is definitely one of those that exceeded all expectations because it met the really low and really disappointing expectations at the start, and it really grew as a show over time. I think that there was clearly some internal struggle over what kind of show they wanted to make, and either or could have been good. They just didn't know which one to choose, and so the original season, the first season, really suffered for it a lot, with a lot of disappointing or weirdly toned and weirdly paced character arcs that went nowhere, that were infuriating, that really sort of dragged the show down, along with episodes that just felt like a mishmash of genres, but not in a good way. And it didn't feel like a good enjoyment to watch. There was no entertaining quality to it. It just felt like a mess. And obviously, halfway through the first season, and second half of the season isn't good still, but it has a lot more good episodes. It's not cohesive enough to really be called a quality TV show until the second season, where it goes full-on camp, full-on gory, messy silliness, and owning it. So throughout the various seasons since then, while the seasons do have a bit of iffiness to them, there's episodes and arcs that really still don't go anywhere. The overall tone and atmosphere and aim of the show has never faltered since. And that makes the show so much more easier and so much more understandable and enjoyable, because you see that despite all these little other flaws that are still present, the people behind the show have an idea that they know what they want to do, and by hell or high water, they are going to get to where they want to get. And it sort of gives like a little kick to the show, like, so what? There's things that are dropped, but the show has a point B they want to get to this season from this point A, and they're going to do whatever it takes, whatever they can to get to that point B, and they're going to try to make it as enjoyable as possible, and more often than not, they actually do. And this season, which I believe is season 4, is no different. As a season, it started off being long Halloween infused, very mafia focused, and then really jumped across to setting up the Joker, who finally appears in the series. They can't use the name, and they can only use 2 of his like iconic physical attributes at a time, so they keep switching back and forth between what color his hair is and what suit he's wearing and how much lipstick or red mouth paint he has on. But it is the Joker. They confirmed it, that this is it. That's the character as it's going to appear in Gotham. So like that switchover isn't handled with the most grace to it. Both halves of this season had a lot to offer, and this season finale, as it stands, could have been a really solid series finale. I know that last episode I mentioned that there was some concern whether or not this season would have been the last, and despite leaving so many things hanging in terms of like the character arcs and where plots might go, the actual events and how they impact the characters, it made for a satisfying conclusion. It really ends on such a great note that it feels like this is something they wanted to do since the very beginning, because there is a line from the pilot episode that they reiterate here that only makes sense, and I thought that it was such a cheesy line in the pilot. It feels like such a very bland and cliche line that only makes sense in the finale, because they're using the cliche line for a very sort of corny in itself moment. The corniness of the moment that they use it, which is the final scene, it really works because they complement each other so much. That very coalescing sort of atmosphere to that one moment. Other than that, I'm glad it's getting 13 more episodes. I'm glad it's getting a final chance to wrap everything up. I think that Karen Monaghan as the Joker is rather good. He reminds me a lot of Frank Miller's Joker, especially from the original Dark Knight Returns and also Batman and Robin. Someone who is a lot more grim, a lot more reserved, and who only is known the Joker mainly because of his physical attributes. Although there is some laughter and smiling involved as well. And so I really enjoyed that. I think he plays that so much better than the other character he played, who was the twin brother who had been on the show since the very beginning. I think that the only thing missing from him right now is just the laughter and more smiling. I think that he really nailed that back then, but not the manic personality. And I think he fits a Frank Miller mold so much better. Other than that, it's going to be a tight fit, I think. 13 episodes is definitely going to be a tight fit for how much they set up in this finale. I expect that the next season is going to face some struggle in maybe doing things off screen than to really develop it in a fully fleshed out way, which is fine. But as long as they keep the central core around, the central characters as developed as they have been so far, then I have no problem with it, and I can't wait for that. Okay, moving on to Krypton and its season finale. But first, I had no real ill will toward Krypton since it was announced. I always thought it was an interesting idea, especially during the first time we ever heard news of it, and that it was going to be a Man of Steel prequel. And you can definitely see shades of that in the first couple episodes. There were moments where you can tell that Goyer really had the idea of fleshing out Krypton, but it really has grown into its own sensibility and its own story arc. It feels like such a great Elseworld story. You have Adam Strange coming back in time. You have multiple characters coming back in time and really messing up Superman's backstory in catastrophic ways, and it is hilarious. It is so thrilling and engaging and dramatic in the best possible ways. There are some parts where I think it could have been a lot more tired, a bit more of a retread of just your generic dynasty or political intrigue sort of story. And it really does sidestep that a lot of the time. And I really appreciated that. The highlights would have to be Brainiac and, I'm just going to say it, General Zod appearing. I think that the actors and the looks they went for both of those work immensely. This is probably one of my favorite General Zods. There are extended scenes where he gets to talk with other characters, and you get a lot more of a look into his personality and his sort of force of magnetism, and how he can really try to rally people around him despite the inherent hypocrisies of his arguments. And I love those moments. It really does add a lot of dimension to a character who really has no contrast. There's no romantic contrast against him, other than what the characters of the past see themselves. And so them working it out for themselves through just being actually dynamic characters is such a delight. And Brainiac is, I think, a really great villain. He's not so great a character. I know that there are takes in Brainiac which really do flesh him out a lot. And this isn't quite necessarily one of them, although what the show does do is make him incredibly threatening. The danger of Brainiac is so real, it's so horrifying. The season finale really does capitalize on this, and it has a lot of imagery and exposition that make Brainiac and the entire concept of Brainiac just so messed up and so horrifying and amazing that they're able to pull that off. The season finale as a whole does leave up the show to a lot of potential, I think. There are a lot of complaints that the show is probably a bit too foregone, that there's no point to the show, but the show itself really does rebuke all that in the season finale. It does set itself as an Elseworld. It does set itself as something that does have meaning to any people who cared about having meaning at all. I wouldn't have cared. The show could have gone out on clockwork with Superman's backstory, and I still would have been engaged because of the acting and the writing. The changes it does make, though, make a second season so much more intriguing because there's so many things they could do right now with it, and it leads on such a great cliffhanger and plot threads dangling that are just begging to be done amazing things with, and I have full faith in showrunners and the writers to pull that off. If I had to say something negative about the show, other than the first couple of episodes and the sort of cliche nature that it does eventually sidestep, would have to be Adam Strange. I think that the show really did miss a trick with him and didn't fully realize his potential as the character who had come back in time and semi instigated the whole plot. It just sort of leaves him in a weird place. He got a lot of development. He didn't get so much development that it made him fully fleshed out or really develop him in a sense that was fully integral to the plot, other than just being the person who knew more about the future than anyone else at that point. He just sort of gets shooed off and then is left in a precarious situation that doesn't really help the cause of the show as a whole. They could not bring him back again, and the show probably would not suffer it. And I hope that next season they find ways to really make use of him, because I think there's so much they could do with him that they really didn't. But the second season sounds like a really big kick. There's so many things that they have set up, and if they do all those, then yeah, the show could be really fun. And they really still have plans for Ran and Thanagar and Hawkman and Hawkgirl. And it pretty much ends with General Zod declaring war on the universe and using Kryptonians as like his army to do it. So that could lead to a lot of fun stuff. And even if it's 10 episodes, I'm not expecting much. I'm not getting my hopes up too much. But what they do show, I expect them to do a lot of great stuff with. Anyway, so let's move on to Deadpool 2, which I have to say is probably one of my favorite comic movies of the year. It's quite shocking because I only just liked the original. I'm not going to say that I disliked it, that I hated it, and that I didn't enjoy it. That wouldn't be true. I just thought that it was okay. It had a nice charm to it, but the story and the jokes were just sort of middling for me. The style and the direction and just ingenuity of it was the real draw for me, and I enjoyed that. But as a whole movie, I watched it and I rewatched it at least once, and that was it. I didn't feel any sort of real connection to it on like a more intimate entertainment level, like emotionally or mentally or just viscerally, which is not the case with Deadpool 2. I felt all of those with this, and I had to say that I have to address a few complaints at first. That I understand that a lot of people didn't like it because it upped the ante a bit more in terms of the show-offiness of it, which I have to agree with. The charm of the original is not quite there this time. It's not so focused or bare bones as the original was, which gave it that kick because you're watching something that's a bit more unconventional. Deadpool 2 is a lot more conventional in terms of the rapid fire and scale of it, in terms of like action sequences and a blockbuster tone, which the original didn't quite have to its benefit. So I understand that. Another thing that I have to address is that there's gotten a lot of flack for supposedly doing a woman in refrigerators moment with Deadpool's wife, Vanessa, who dies in the first couple minutes of this movie. And I have to say, I didn't quite get that impression. I understand now that it's very much like that setup where the character is killed off, woman character, girlfriend, wife, love interest is killed off to give the main character motivation or set off a chain of events of plot in motion. And like, okay, yeah, I can see that now. But I think that the main stark difference is that we had an entire movie to really hammer home the importance of this character to Deadpool and the importance of that dynamic and that relationship to Deadpool as well. Like, both of these are important. The character is important, as well as what that relationship and what that connection actually means on a character basis level. And that is only, even though the character is killed off in the first couple minutes here, that is hammered home throughout the entirety of Deadpool 2. And it honestly did threaten to, or at least it did feel like it was going to carry forward into more of Deadpool movies if they had made them. And I'll get back to that later about it felt like. And so I didn't think that that was so much a moment where it was just to set the plot in motion or to give Wade motivation. It did feel as though Deadpool had lost something important and vital, and the movie never missed the chance to capitulate on that again and again and again. And it does that so well. And so if maybe I'm just completely full of shit and people are like, no, it's still a woman's federation moment, then please call me out on it. I just didn't feel like it was something to just start the process and then be forgotten later on. And I think that she still plays a hefty role in the story. And that's something that I'll get to in a bit as well. But what really sold me on this movie is how it handled the character focus of the various factions within it. One of the things that the first movie is known for is that it was aggressively marketed as a Valentine's Day movie, as a love story. And yeah, there are arguments for that, and I understand what they were going for, but it still just kind of felt like a bit more of a joke-focused theme rather than something that was an overriding presence in that movie. While in this one, it jokes at the beginning that it's a family movie, and it really does come off as that. The movie is all about the importance of parenthood or of a parent figure to an actual child. I thought that I played with that wonderfully. Deadpool has to really come into his own, despite having his own apparently abusive parenting on his backstory to this kid, who is probably one of the highlights of the movie. I love him. His name is Russell, played by Julian Dennison, a New Zealand actor who has been, I think, in a couple of acclaimed indie films. So he has to really contend with his own nihilism and depression and suicidal tendencies and just like the entire toxicity of his personality, but also these burgeoning feelings of paternity and kinship that he's felt with his kid. But you also have that paralleled by Cable, who is also a father, and he's also on his personal quest to protect this child as well, his own child. And that is Dark Mirror or Dark Parallel with Juggernaut, who takes over the parental role that Deadpool has now been trying to get with Russell, to make a connection with him, to keep him alive. And what it really does is show how this kid is in desperate need of someone to care for him, to care about, and to have that feeling reciprocated. And it just hammered home again and again that Deadpool isn't really the best person suited for that, but he is trying. And everything in this movie is about these parent figures trying, while Juggernaut just sort of takes advantage of it. He is an enabler. He's an apparent figure. He just uses his kid and allows his kid to run wild. It's nothing about tempering him or really about teaching his kid how to be. He just lets him run riot and eventually almost ends in tragedy. And so all I thought were really incredibly handled. And the movie does a great job of showcasing the main theme of fatherhood and what that means and the lengths that people would go to take care of the kids that either are theirs or that they want to make theirs through just an emotional connection. And I thought like that really hit me. That was such a great core. But there are other things about the movie that I thought were also immaculately handled. I think that the connections to the comic were a lot more stronger this time, especially Uncanny X-Force by Rick Remender, as the main plot of the story of this movie is very much a warped version of the Kid Apocalypse sort of storyline in his X-Force run, where you have this version of Apocalypse who is still a child, and there is always this lingering question of what to do. There are parts where a lot of the characters in that run waver on that question, and Deadpool 2 is pretty much exactly the same sort of method with handling the character of Russell and what to do with him. And Deadpool's connection to Russell is mirrored almost exactly from that comic. It felt like just a great story to really mine from that wasn't your typical Deadpool story or wasn't something too comedic or even too cliche. And I really appreciated, even though it changed almost all the details, that's really all you can expect from an X-Men movie from Fox at this point anyway. Like God Loves, Man Kills, which was turned to X2. All the details are changed, but the same themes of the comic, the message of the comic, and effects and impact of the comic were carried over to the movie despite all that. To hammer this home even, they have Deadpool ending up in what is pretty much his X-Force costume from that run, with the gray and black affectation instead of the red and black. And a lot like that was really clever. That was a really clever nod to the fact that they're pulling so much from this run. And there are articles that I've seen right now saying that they should, or that was an Easter egg, but no, it was the actual story of the movie that they were doing. Like, they don't need to pull from it. They already pulled from it. Either they continue or don't use this threads from the comic that they've put into this one, whatever they end up making. It was such a great translation and adaptation, honestly, of that section of Deadpool's history. But speaking of section of Deadpool's history that I thought were really finely remixed into this one is the concept of Lady Death. Now, I know that there was a lot of backlash against Infinity War for not including Lady Death in Thanos' backstory because she's such an integral part of that. And even though they didn't, I thought that they still did a great job with Thanos in the context that they wanted to use him in. Deadpool 2 doesn't use the concept of Lady Death either, but they are able to find a way around that to still have the same impact. Like I said, the details and actual characters might be changed, but the themes and the intent stay the same in the translation. I'll give a truncated and by memory version only of Lady Death and Deadpool's history is that when he was being sort of killed over and over again in unlocking his mutant powers of regeneration, he would be in a sort of dead zone, and there he met Death and they fell in love, and eventually he made this promise to the next time he died he would stay with her forever, but she had gotten impatient at that point because he kept going back to life, and at the last time he went back to life it was for petty revenge instead of being with her. And so he went back to life to get his revenge on scientists who were torturing him, who were killing him over and over again, and he tried to die again, but he couldn't because regeneration powers had fully manifested. And so that was such a gut punch that he could no longer be with the person he loved, which was death itself. And what Deadpool 2 does, and smartly so, is that with Vanessa having been killed, they give her the role of Lady Death, of the person who Deadpool meets every time he dies. And he dies multiple times in this movie. And his deaths are a lot more aggressive and a lot more seriously handled in the first movie. When he dies, you really feel like he's dead each time. That the deaths are actual deaths and he just comes back to life as a matter of fact of his powers. And that's something that really does weigh on him. The multiple scenes where he meets Vanessa in the afterlife, who does take on the Lady Death role of someone that he really wants to die to be with, that he had hoped to die and be with, and giving an impact. We had so much time to get used to Vanessa, to know her, to know about the relationship and the importance of that relationship, because after her death, he loses all hope. He even allows himself to almost die of cancer. Actually pretty harrowing. I have to give it to the makeup department on that one for making him seem so close to death, despite all the heavy makeup already on him. All the things that they did from a purely adaptation standpoint were incredibly clever. They found a way to take stuff from the comics and the stuff that they had set up in the first movie and just really remix it to fit in a coherent and consistent sensibility to the movies. There's no Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles out of the sewers sort of trying to retroactively be more like the source material. It takes the source material and the movies and tries to find a middle ground and successfully does it. I understand why people felt like the movie was a bit all over the place, because it sort of is. The movie does jump around a lot. It's a lot more grandiose. Like I said, it loses that charm. It feels, honestly, a lot more like Apocalypse, and I liked Apocalypse. I really did. But I understand that the movie did try a lot more in Apocalypse and did retread a bit. And same complaints could be said right here. Deadpool 2 tries a lot and also retreads a lot. I'm wary about news of an extended cut because I thought the movie was fine the length it is. It told all the things it needed to say. There are some things that you had hoped to carry over stylistically or tonally that are kind of lost in the shuffle. But I think that it is a fine sequel. My only real complaint is that the mid-credit sequence, which I enjoyed, I thought was funny, does negate a lot of the character arcs that I spent the last couple minutes praising. Because as a gag, the mid-credits are funny, but it does lessen the importance of stuff like using Lady Death and the theme of fatherhood and Cable's whole character arc, because they went out of their way to give interviews saying that no, the mid-credit sequence is just not a gag. It's actually a part of the story. But I have to agree with Ryan Reynolds. There was this article that came out just the other day that said that Ryan Reynolds initially felt like mid-credit sequence that they shot was a bit of a cheat. And I agree with that. It does feel like a bit of a cheat. Ryan Reynolds said that he doesn't want to make a Deadpool 3. He wants Deadpool 3 as it is to become the X-Force movie. To just sort of make that jump and not make a third one. To keep the storyline sort of consistent. And honestly, it does feel like it's lessened because of the mid-credit sequence. It lost a lot of the interest of it. Honestly, I can see why he wouldn't want to make a third one, because these two as themselves, they are pretty well rounded out. But overall, still a great movie. I really, really loved it. And I'm not going to mince words. It's so fantastic. In fact, in all the commotion to get to this part, I accidentally forgot to do the entire section of what I had read this week, which isn't so much a problem with me enjoying Deadpool 2 so much, more that there was nothing this week that I felt was any interesting. Stuff like Flash War and No Justice, I have to say, weren't that good. I may be too hard on Flash War because I'm so biased against Joshua Williams' run. I don't think he's had a good run at all. And Flash War, the first issue that came out this week, was competent. It's not like a complete shit show. Yet I can't get excited for it because he always fumbles his arcs. They might start out good, but then by the end, he does not stick the landing. Flash War, I can't help but feel like it's going to go in the same direction. It feels very, very blindingly of the gimmick of like having the Flashes be at war for me to care. No Justice still isn't grabbing me. It still feels saccharine. It still feels like a bunch of character dynamics just pushed together just to have the license to say that you made a giant, big blockbuster moment. I think that, like I might have said before, Snyder knows how to do a blockbuster story, or at least he knows the foundations for a blockbuster story. But he doesn't really know the work to put into that. So at only 4 issues, there are moments that happen that feel so rushed, that don't feel earned, and it just feels like a bunch of bland nothingness. It just doesn't have that kind of impact, even if it has Vril Dox in it. And Vril Dox just sounds and is written just not very well. The last thing I read this week had to have been Super Sons, the finale of the ongoing. And it doesn't feel like a finale. There's a rumor going around, or a theory honestly, that the bookends of this issue would show an elderly Clark Kent, I believe. It might be actually John as a grandpa, who knows, telling his grandkids like the stories of the Super Sons. And they feel like such out of nowhere bookends that people are saying that they were just added on to give the final issue a sense of finality because it had been canceled so unjustly. And the Maxi series itself feels like it's just going to be like arcs that he had planned anyway. So it's going to be set before Bendis' status quo. I just don't think it's been given a fair shake, and that Bendis is not the person that they should have had given so much leeway to already. Just giving Bendis like an entire line is just an accident waiting to happen. Alright, so moving on to listener questions. Only have one this week, and it is from Sunglass Pre. Her question for this week is, if I could pick any comic franchise to direct personally for a movie adaptation, what would I pick and how would I do it? Now, this is a great question because I haven't been shy about it. I love the New Gods. I love the Fourth World. And ever since Ava DuVernay, who I think is going to do a horrible job and who I have no faith in, got tapped to direct the movie, I've actually been giving this a lot of thought. Like, how would you do it? How could you take 4 different series that don't really ever coalesce? This Fourth World saga never really comes together, and they were never really meant to. The main story was always supposed to be in New Gods. But I don't think you can make just the New Gods saga with just Orion and just Orion's plot and not get a lot of backlash for that. You would have to find a way to bring them all together. And so the idea that I came up with would be obviously for a trilogy. And the layout for them would be this. The first movie would be something completely unexpected. Orion and Mr. Miracle scot-free, backstories, and coming of age on New Genesis and Apocalypse respectively. It would be a mix of the Pact, which is the backstory for the New Gods, about the first great clash, the first war between New Genesis and Apocalypse that ends with the exchanging of the sons, Orion and Scott-Free, between the fathers. It would also bring in the young Scott-Free stories that were backups in Kirby's run of Mr. Miracle that led to the He-Man issue, which had him escape from Apocalypse right after meeting his mentor and Big Barda, and them having their initial bond and emotional tether being created. I would counteract that with some new stuff about Orion's childhood on New Genesis and just have it be a very sort of thematic nature versus nurture, them growing into the men they're going to be, and the movie ending with them both leaving to Earth. This sort of just being a very character focused and very, like I said, coming of age film for both of them. I honestly think that would be the best way to do it because there's a lot of story there and you get so much of a license to world build and to explain away a lot of the new gods and fourth world mythologies, and you would be hard pressed to fit into just one movie by itself through the lens of these children who are growing up in that environment and that setting. The second movie would be obviously about their adventures on Earth. But what I would do is that Mr. Miracle would stop being important about halfway through the movie and would eventually sort of just fade away from the focus of the movie. And that's not something that I say lightly. I say it more that Mr. Miracle's whole point is that he did not want to be part of the conflict. He knew God freedom, and that is freedom from his past, freedom from the tethers of like the world that's pulling him back and into that war. That's how I see it. And so his plot and his role in the movie would be more to meet Big Barda and to just get his legs rolling on Earth as a super escape artist, and then eventually be able to leave this life and to lead a new life with Big Barda and his troop. And Orion's arc would be a bit more of a standard superhero movie with Orion, and fight Mantis and just bring into focus his own fulfilling of the prophecy of going to Apocalypse, then to Earth, then to war. And eventually sort of ending the movie on a cliffhanger with him going to Apocalypse after finding like the menace that Darkseid is doing on the planet through Mantis or through whichever villain is in that role, in that slot, and learns that it was all in service of finding the anti-life equation and him taking the fight straight back to Apocalypse and Darkseid and Darkseid's forces, just completely messing him up and leaving him for dead. That's the cliffhanger that the original comics ended on anyway, before the Hunger Dogs came out. I would introduce the Forever People as well in like a sort of side character prologue sense. Like the first scene would be two teenagers riding down the road and then just getting totally supplanted by a boom tube with these crazy ass otherworldly teenagers flying out. And what I would do is have a sort of mix between what Kirby did of them just being teenagers on a mission to save Beautiful Dreamer, but also aspects of Giffen and DiDio's sort of goodwill and Greenpeace take, where they're here on a mission to save Earth as well, or at least help Earth out. And I would have them come to conflict with Deathsad and Glorious Godfrey, with also a mix of the Lump in there and Dr. Bedlam. Either combine multiples of those characters into one or two, but I would definitely try to fit aspects of all those characters as their conflict. While Orion is on a more physical side, for other people have a lot more to contend with through like mental or psychological threats. And I thought that'd be interesting, and also end them on a cliffhanger. The most famous cliffhanger, I think, of the New Gods, which is the impact of the Omega effect as they all get picked off one by one, except for Seraphan, the one who wears the cowboy hat, and have the movie end with him and Orion both at their deepest point. Orion sort of being thought dead by pretty much everyone, and Seraphan just being alone on the Wonder Wagon with his friends all gone and him having no idea what to do. Which would lead into like the third one, which would just be like the backstory that the Hunger Dogs doesn't really have. Because a lot of things that Hunger Dogs, even though I love the Hunger Dogs, a lot of things that happen with Orion in that, like him falling in love and the emotional connection between him and Becca that ends up eventually really setting up the cornerstone of the theme of that book, which is sort of letting go of his hatred and finding a way to survive through not actively participating in a war that would endanger everything he's fought for. And just really hammer that in and focus on him coming to terms with that as he recovers, honestly. Sort of like what the Dark Knight Rises try to do. And also focus on Seraphan and the Forever People trying to find each other again and eventually, I guess, defeating whichever villain is there to defeat. And it ending overall for Ryan doing what he did in Hunger Dogs, leaving Apocalypse to die, to meet up with Highfather and Lightray and all that on the new planet they're going to settle on to start a new life away from the conflict that Darkseid is allowed to really infest and destroy Apocalypse through his own actions and through his own unwavering hatred. That's where it ends. I think that's not perfect, honestly. There's no real perfect way to make interrelated but also completely disconnected stories into a singular cohesive narrative. I think that's honestly more suited toward a TV show where you can go back between and forth subplots or parallel narratives and things can end at another point despite not really interconnecting with the main seasonal arc. But I think it's the best sort of balance you could find, at least as a template for a movie series. And I don't know what Ava DuVernay is going to do, but I don't trust her at all. I think that based on how horrible The Wrinkle in Time was, that New Gods is going to pan out. Anyway, if it couldn't be New Gods, then what I would do would be Gen 13, because who doesn't want to see a bunch of moronic teenagers doing such a crazy bullshit with their powers and just going on wacky adventures? I'd make that movie. That's my second choice. It'd be, if I can't do New Gods, I do Gen 13. Thank you for the questions, Sunglass Pre. And that's it for this episode. As always, thank you for listening. And you can contact me for questions, topics, or comments on Twitter at THE_SNICKMAN. And I'll put that in the descriptions both on iTunes, CastBox, and below on YouTube if you're listening on YouTube. As always, a shout out to at DOTEMCEE for the cover art. Thank you, and see you next week.